I'm very happy to introduce our next presenter. Open Doors organization is, I think, at the forefront when it comes to challenges, solutions, everything to do with accessibility in the US. And it's been an honor to work with their organization over the last many number of years, kind of back and forth across the pond, if you will. So I'd like to introduce Eric Lipp, who is the Executive Director of Open Doors, who will give us some insight to what's happening in the US accessibility arena. Eric? Eric?
Hi, everyone. Sorry there. I'm still not a professional Zoomer or GoToWebinar or whatever we're using these days. But it's great to be here. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. And hopefully we will all be back together shortly. I'm actually in Los Angeles presenting from the West Coast today. And I've been on the road a lot recently, so I've been watching what goes on and how travel's picking back up. For us at Open Doors, we never stopped traveling during the pandemic. We have still the travel industry did not completely shut down. So we did travel quite a bit during the pandemic. So we've been able to see this rebound a lot and watching people, using wheelchairs, canes, people with, low vision, who are blind. We've been watching and seeing how the trends might pick up. And what I've noticed is that while maybe travel hasn't gotten back to where it was in aviation, I see a lot of people in the airports being pushed or using their own assistive device. So I think that one of the things that's changed is that the leisure traveler has become, let's say, more important right now than the business travel in aviation. So we're seeing this increase in people with disabilities traveling, and it's kind of happening naturally. So that's a really good thing. But it's been tough, I think, for a lot of the wheelchair service providers in the United States to staff enough people. So I think wait times are very long right now. I think that some of that has to do with staffing, and some of it has to do with the fact that there are more people traveling now using wheelchairs and asking for that service than there were previously. And I think there will continue to grow. One of the interesting things, the differences that we all know between the US in North America setup versus Europe, where the airport is responsible for wheelchair service. In the US, it is the responsibility of the airline. And most other places in the world, it's the airports that handle the wheelchair service. Some of the airlines have some say in it, but not as much as you would with a contract here in the United States. So does that create market efficiencies? I'm not positive if it's good or bad. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't think the verdict's out whether the foreign model is better than our current model here in the United States. But I can say this, that here in the US, it's still not a perfect system. And in fact, it's pretty far from a perfect system. So there's so many challenges. Most people don't know that there are so many challenges in just pushing a wheelchair. I mean, you would never think that so much goes into it, but it does. And when you start looking at the complexities of what is going on in wheelchair pushing, you understand a lot of the outliers that make it very difficult to predict things like weather, even traffic. It's hard to predict if you don't know when the Invictus Games are, or when the Paralympics are, or when the World Championship wheelchair racing things are, to prepare for those early. Really, it's very difficult for wheelchair service providers to have the right amount of people at the right time all the time. I think there's a challenge there that has to be overcome with some technology, and that's what I think is one of the greatest things that's going on right now. Is that there's some really good Uh, there are some really good things happening with companies like Ozeon. They really have great software. And if you think about it right now, and I think this is what the airlines are thinking, and so am I, is frankly, I use Uber, and why can't I use that for wheelchair service? I use Lyft. People who use ride shares think that it sounds even easier now than ever before, but they don't realize that it's not as easy now as ever before, because there's a lot of what we call at Open Doors, we call them ad hocs. What they are is those folks who come to the airport, and there's a lot of them, without requesting wheelchair service. And when they get there, they realize how large the structure is, and they end up needing to request wheelchair service. And that alone is a difficult thing, because we don't know where people are going to enter. We don't know when they're going to arrive, so we can't necessarily have somebody there right away. I think that one of the great things I'm seeing now in wheelchair service is that we're starting to know better where everybody is and how long it might be for you to get service. Unfortunately, I ran into a situation the other day. I won't mention any names or anything, but I was told that the wait was an hour, and straight up, and naturally that wouldn't make me happy. But it just goes to show you that there's the communication, and the situation is that there are wait times now that are like an hour. And if you have any mobility, you're almost better walking to your gate rather than waiting for a push, because when you know you're going to have to wait an hour, and you put that into the time that you have for your flight, things become pretty stressful, and you can have a lot of anxiety. But I think with all of these new softwares, I think that there's going to be a way one day to track the wheelchairs, to request them through an app, and to know how long your wait's going to be before you even arrive at the airport. So I think right now we're in a good position to do better. But you can't forget that there's a human aspect to wheelchair pushing. You know, we can get the efficiencies done, and if we can get the economics behind getting the efficiencies in, then we're still left with the fact that we have so many workers there who are disconnected to the people they are pushing. And that creates an enormous gap. And I think what we've forgotten with our wheelchair service providers uh, is mostly that we're in the hospitality industry. Really, we're not so aviation. As a wheelchair service provider, if I was pushing, I would feel like I'm in the hospitality industry, because I'm working at an airport and I'm helping people all day. Instead, it turns into a race, or or a total disconnect. At the airport, there is a counterculture at every airport, because there are so many people that work there. A lot of times, wheelchair service providers, the staff get involved in the counterculture at the airport, so they forget about helping people. Laurel, who works at Open Doors, and I were in New Jersey, and I was getting pushed in a wheelchair, a Staxi wheelchair, and the gentleman who was pushing me was waving to his friends at TSA and drove me literally into the wall. And we couldn't, we couldn't believe it. Unfortunately for him, I was there to train the wheelchair service provider at the time, and so it didn't work out too well for him. But it's important to keep people focused and let them know that this is the hospitality industry, and that there needs to be constant training, not once a year, not, it's more like once a month. For a wheelchair service provider, it's a very difficult, situation across the globe, and it's inconsistent. And as a user, you think it's more consistent, because all it is to most people is pushing a wheelchair. But it isn't consistent, because when you get overseas, some of the workers there are highly trained. They're paid better than those in the United States. So you have a lot of obstacles, and we're unable to put out a consistent product anywhere. Even in the United States, we have the same company can have a different workforce in Chicago than they do in Dallas. And the one in Chicago could be failing, and the one in Dallas could be succeeding. So the consistencies is something that really need to get there with the hospitality part of this, where people understand that it's not okay to push somebody without trying to start a conversation. without understanding that every time somebody sits down in the wheelchair I'm about to push, they feel something, whether it's anxiety or they don't normally get pushed in a wheelchair and they're having to do that now. They feel this loss of independence, and conveying these messages to the staff on a consistent basis is something that really needs to improve across the globe. And I think that the airlines need to drive that. And I know the arguments on the other side of this too very well. And usually it's a money argument. Uh, and I think that in the United States, having it as a money argument is different than having it as a money argument in other countries, right? Because in other countries, the money argument turns into an airport thing, which can be handled by ticketing or taxing the greater amount of people to make sure that they pay for this type of service. So I think, whereas in the United States, it kind of just gets to the lowest bidder. And when I talk about lowest bidders, people do things like change the uniforms to make it less expensive so that they can bid lower. There's all kinds of things that change to get in a lot of these situations. And so then the bids come in too low and we're unable to pay the wages of the pushers enough so that we're getting the best out of them. The one thing that I always try to convey is that right now, wheelchair service, the pushers really need to understand that, it's not likely they're going to get a raise from the airline or the airport or their company. The only place they have a chance to get a raise from is from me, the consumer. If they can connect with the consumer, then I don't tip them because I think I'm supposed to. I tip them because they earned it. They're good. And I think when you understand the hospitality industry, you understand that you don't really work for tips. You just get them because people like you because you do your job well. And I think that's something that people have to look at in the wheelchair service industry about hiring practices and training practices to get people, more in tune with what's going on with their passengers, because there's a disconnect there. But I will say overall, in aviation, wheelchair pushing does continue to be like the leading complaint amongst passengers. Those complaints have lessened and gotten better. And I think things like the new softwares that are out there are really going to be the game changers for the efficiencies of the system. And then the cost will get in line. And then hopefully we can get the hospitality back into this industry. And we'll see a big change in that, especially in the wait times. And a lot of wheelchair service providers are tasked with doing lift and transfers as well. And I think that's something that needs to do better as well. I think currently what's out in the world, the hardware to do a lift and transfer, meaning like the aisle chair and things like that, they aren't quite there yet either, but we've seen improvements there as well. As most of you know, we used to use those high back chairs that really were ugly and kind of degrading. And now the new Staxi onboard aisle chair is a little bit more comfortable and seems like a smoother ride. So we're making a lot of progress in the hardware too. And even when the Staxi kind of came on and everybody started buying those, we saw some other companies like Moby come up to compete with them. And for me, for the community, that's what you want to see. Is you want to see people starting to compete for your business like the airports are doing. Like we just had here with 3 airports, everybody doing something. And I'm sure that there were a lot more airports that tried to be in the finals. So I'm not sure how many airports tried, but that's all progress too. But I think in the wheelchair service industry, you have really 3 of the main things. You have the hardware, you have the software, and then you have the people. And there are enormous gaps in between there. And I'm hoping the software and the hardware can help drive better people, so that it makes it more fun. It makes it fun at all to have a wheelchair push in the airport, to make it part of the experience. One of the things I learned at Disney. I was there a couple of years ago with United Airlines, and at Disney, they said something interesting. The reason at the airport you get picked up by a Disney shuttle is because they want the experience to start right then. They don't want the experience to start for you once you get to your hotel. So what if we weren't part of that experience? What if it wasn't that my wheelchair push was so awesome and so much fun that I not only tipped him, but I'm going to Disney, then I get on the Disney shuttle, and all of a sudden I'm part of this magical experience, and it all started at the airport. So that's my dream. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. There are a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is, do you think introducing new technology such as autonomous wheelchairs would be able to standardize the service and avoid some problems of having to constantly train push staffs?
I love the autonomous wheelchair. I love the idea. I think it's kind of like the car still right now, though. You got to be able to drive in traffic, but certainly that is going to be a game changer in the long run in transporting people long distances through the airport. I love it.
So perhaps maybe a hybrid solution whereby some services are autonomous and some are conventional, you mean?
Yep, I think that might be where we're headed in the near term.
Fantastic. William, do you have anything to add or anything to ask?
No, thank you very much, Eric, for making the time and making the connection work.
Yeah, thank you too for all that you do, because you guys are behind a lot of why we're here and what we're doing, and that progress is because of the three people you see on the screen. So keep up the good work. This is fantastic.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you very much, Eric.